Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. Tonight, 6 dioceses in Illinois are facing claims from the state's attorney general. She says the church withheld the names of 500 priests accused of sexual abuse. The charge is raising a lot of questions, like what categories does all these accusations fit into? We will dig into all of this tonight, including speaking to Crux editor John Allen. But we begin with the developments in Illinois. Currents News' Michelle Powers reports.
Illinois Attorney General says the state's Catholic dioceses have failed abuse victims.
Just based on a preliminary review of files for the 6 dioceses throughout Illinois, we have found that there are at least 500 additional priests and clergy members who have allegations of sexual assault against minors against them.
Lisa Madigan is acknowledging church officials have publicly identified 185 priests credibly accused of abuse in Illinois, but is arguing that's not even close to the real number of those with allegations against them.
We've had over 300 people contact us. We put up a clergy abuse hotline, and people who are calling us, they're not looking for money. They're looking for some measure of justice.
In a new preliminary report made public Wednesday, accusations have been leveled against 690 priests. Most of those go back decades. In a response to the Attorney General, the Diocese of Springfield said they have provided the office with documentation of all allegations of abuse, whether or not those allegations were deemed credible. Bishop Thomas Pabrocki said, "Revisiting the paying cost to victims of abuse has motivated us to redouble our commitments to the reforms undertaken many years ago and to sustain our vigilance." The Attorney General's report does not include some key details, like when the allegations were made. It does not accuse the dioceses of withholding names of credibly accused clergy, only that the list of names of accused clergy is far longer than made public.
We need as a conference, as brother bishops, to take up this issue for the good of the church in this country without delay.
Cardinal BLASE CUPICH, the leader of the ARCHDIOCESE of Chicago, emerged as a fierce defender of survivors at the United States Bishops' meeting this November. In a new statement following the Attorney General's claims, he said, "I want to express again the profound regret of the whole church for our failures to address the scourge of clerical sexual abuse. It is the courage of the victim survivors that has shed purifying light on this dark chapter in church history." Cardinal CUPICH says the Archdiocese of Chicago, in particular, has been making strides against clerical sex abuse since 1991, more than a decade before the Dallas Charter. Michelle Powers, Currents News.
The biggest controversy over identifying by name priests accused of abuse involves whether the allegations are credible. But how is that definition arrived at? Currents News' Tim Harfman reports the answer is not always clear-cut.
Around the country, dioceses are releasing names of priests considered credibly accused of sexual abuse. But what does the term mean? Christopher White, the national correspondent for the Tablet and Crux, spent weeks researching the issue. He says when it comes to deciding whether an accusation is credible or not, standards vary.
There are a lot of competing definitions of what credibly accused means, and there's also a debate as to who actually gets to define the term itself.
The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops doesn't have a formal definition. At the USCCB's November meeting, many prelates expressed a desire for a uniform national policy. USCCB President Daniel DINARDO vowed he would look into this.
We'll work on finalizing the standards of accountability for bishops, finalizing the protocol for removed bishops, and studying national guidelines for the publication of lists of names of those clerics facing substantiated claims of abuse.
While the first instance of a diocese publicly releasing names of accused priests dates back to the early 2000s, following the release of a Pennsylvania grand jury report in August, dioceses around the country have started to follow suit.
There is the interest to protect children, and at the same time there is the interest to ensure that a person is not being dealt with unjustly, being unjustly accused.
Monsignor KIERAN Harrington, the vicar for communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, points out that while many survivors of sexual abuse and watchdog groups have praised the move, some advocates have raised concerns that innocent priests may have their good names ruined without due process.
Why would that happen? Well, perhaps the priest wasn't assigned in the parish at the time the abuse was alleged. Maybe it's a person who has suffered from this sort of trauma can sometimes make an allegation, misidentify somebody.
In February, Pope Francis will convene a global meeting on sex abuse at the Vatican. The summit is more likely going to address broader issues, leaving dioceses to sort out their own policies for releasing names and deeming clergy credibly accused. Tim Harfman, Currents News.
Crux editor John Allen joins us now from Rome. There's a lot of questions raised by what the Illinois Attorney General is saying that we want to look into. John, I want to begin with this. A lawyer for the Chicago Archdiocese, name of William Kunkel, is rejecting the Attorney General's findings. Two reasons here. He's saying the idea that abuse is more extensive than what's been reported by the church is false, and that naming clergy only accused without credibly substantiating the allegations is not fair. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, Liz, what we have here are sort of competing standards of what it means for the church to come clean. Basically, the AG and the critics are taking the position that the church owes the wider world disclosure of every name of every priest who has ever been accused of sexual abuse. The church is taking the position that that's irresponsible, that just because somebody has been accused doesn't mean there's any credibility to that accusation. They're saying that what full disclosure means is disclosure of every priest who has been credibly accused. That is, that there's some basic reason to believe that there is merit to that accusation. And actually, you know, from a logical point of view, Liz, it is really hard to fault the church's position here. But from a PR point of view, of course, given the reputation the church already has, you know, when it's a very difficult argument for them to make in an environment in which people are already disposed to believe that they're engaged in a massive cover-up.
And this probably even adds to the questions, John. As far as we know, the Illinois Attorney General hasn't even set up a grand jury to scrutinize her claims, as happened in Pennsylvania. Shouldn't she bring her findings at least to an independent grand jury?
Well, you know, you'd like to think so. And given the fact that grand juries typically do whatever the Attorney General asks, this is not exactly a strenuous standard. I mean, it is hard to avoid the suspicion, Liz, that part of what's going on here is simply some political grandstanding. I think everybody understands that because of all of the disclosures and the scandals that have surrounded the church, you know, over the last 2 decades and just within the last year, it is in a very vulnerable position, and it's easy to score political points. But I think the deeper question here is, what does responsible conduct by the church in this situation look like? And I think Cardinal CUPICH in Chicago and the Archdiocese are trying to argue that there are some minimum standards of decency here about protecting people's reputations that can't just be sacrificed because, you know, some politician decides to go on a witch hunt.
Now, the Illinois investigation is one of more than a dozen state probes into the church's handling of the cases. Final word here, John. Is there a danger that there could be a rush to judgment without establishing the credibility of some of these allegations?
Well, of course there is that danger, and that is precisely why we have a legal system in which someone is presumed innocent until proven guilty. I mean, you know, I'm naive enough to believe that, like, over time, when the mechanisms of the American justice system kicks in, we'll separate the wheat from the chaff. But I think the pastoral conclusion that the church ought to draw from all of this is that we are going to be living with the clerical sexual abuse scandals, Liz, probably for the rest of your and my adult lifetimes. I mean, this is the new reality of the Catholic Church, that we have to learn how to be church in an environment in which everything the church says and does is scrutinized through the lens of the sex abuse scandal. That's a whole new reality that I think we're only beginning to get our minds around.
All right, John, thank you very, very much. You helped answer a lot of really important questions there, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops established what is known as the Dallas Charter in 2002 to combat and prevent sexual abuse. Some of the measures include creating the Office of Victim Assistance to help individuals who come forward with allegations of abuse. The office provides counseling, referrals for therapy, and other important resources. Every employee of the Brooklyn Diocese, including students, undergoes mandatory training designed to spot the signs of abuse and how to stop it. Bishop DiMarzio meets with survivors and listens to them carefully. One result of those talks is the annual Mass of Hope and Healing in the diocese. And the diocese also has a toll-free and confidential sexual abuse reporting line. That number is 888-634-4499. And for more information, go to the Diocese of Brooklyn's website, dioceseofbrooklyn.org, and click on Protecting Our Children.